Tonight we have a really special treat. I mean, something really cool. And to introduce it, I want to go back to two lines that were in a prayer we read early in the service, on page 266. The first line of each of the two paragraphs. In each age we receive and transmit Torah. In each age we add our wisdom to that which has gone before. I love the fact that we Jews are not called Bnei Avraham, the children of Abraham, or the children of Isaac, or the children of Moses. We are called Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, the one who wrestles with God. We have in our congregation an extraordinary group of people that makes it their business to study on a very regular basis over a very long period of time, years and years. You'll actually see plaques to some of them in the hallway for the years that they have spent studying. Two of our students, who are also temple leaders, which is very cool, decided they wanted to try to wrestle with Torah. And they asked if they could do it, and they were, and I believe are, a little nervous about it, which is good, because you're supposed to be. If you don't, you're not doing it right. And so it is my honor to introduce Brion Feinberg and Robbin Friedell to wrestle with Torah, and this week's parasha, the book of Noah. Do you need it?
He needs it, yes.
He needs it. Okay.
That's the one that controls it.
Hi, I'm Robbin
And I'm Brion, and this is our interpretation
on Midrash.
about this week's Torah portion, which is about Noah.
Noah was a righteous man. He was blameless in his age.
Many of us know the basic story. God told Noah to build an ark. Animals came 2 by 2 to get on the ark. It rained.
A lot.
Everyone else died. The rain stopped.
And then Noah let out a dove to look to see if it could find any dry land. It comes back with an olive branch in its claw, and Noah lets all the animals out.
God creates a rainbow as a sign that God will never again destroy the world, and we live happily ever after.
We chose this week's Torah portion,
This week's Parsha,
not because it was the most well-known stories of the Torah,
not because we had a particular inkling of a deep meaning buried in the text,
and not because it was the only Friday night in October that we were both available.
No, we chose the portion because my middle name is Noah. My Hebrew name is Noah.
And we figured that was as good a reason as any to pick this week's Torah portion.
So we've been studying,
Quite a bit, in fact.
reading various articles about this Torah portion,
Examining it word by word.
examining the various translations word by word, which often led us a little bit astray.
We found a lot of things that we didn't know, and I'm sure a lot of things that you didn't know either.
The whole thing starts with these words.
God saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time.
God regretted that God had made human beings on the earth, and God's heart was deeply troubled. So God said,
I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created, and with them the animals, the birds, the creatures that move along the ground, for I regret that I have made them.
But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord.
But did you know Noah did not only bring 2 of every animal onto that ark?
He brought 7 pairs of the clean animals. And do you know what these clean animals were for?
After his awesome journey to thank God for sparing him and his family, Noah made sacrifices.
And if he had not brought some extra animals, any sacrifices would have killed off an entire species.
Of course, even those animals that were sacrificed were much luckier than almost all the other animals that had drowned on the earth.
This aspect certainly didn't seem fair.
Even if all of humanity, except Noah, had become corrupt and evil, did God really need to drown almost all of the dogs and cats and lions and tigers and bears?
Oh my!
Well, you get the point. And how come they never mention Noah's wife's name? Who is Mrs. Noah? And what about the wives of the sons? Maybe the writers of the Torah are the world's first sexist pigs.
Wait, Can we say pigs in temple?
But tonight, we'd like to talk about one aspect of the story,
One part that intrigued us and left us with more questions than answers.
and it's all about starting over.
Starting fresh, for that's what God is doing here.
Having created all of the universe and mankind, God looks at what was created, and it's not a pretty sight.
Mankind has become evil. Noah stands unique in this corrupt world as a righteous man.
And God decides that this little experiment, this creation of the universe and mankind, it didn't quite go as expected.
So God goes for a do-over, a fresh start. And this reminded me of a project that I did way back in college many years ago. We had to build a tiny computer from wires and chips. All it could do was multiply two small numbers together. You did this by using something called a breadboard, and the result looked something like this picture on the display. And so I thought about the project for a little while, and I started putting everything together. And when everything was ready and I turned it on, nothing happened. And I looked at the jumble of wires, and I didn't know what to do now. And I stared at it, and I stared at it, and I tried to figure out, what did I do wrong? How am I going to fix it? And I stared at it some more, and finally I ripped out all the wires, and I disconnected all the chips, and I started over. But the second time, I knew that I needed to do things differently. I started with a detailed plan showing every connection I needed to make between the different electronic components. And every time I put a wire in place, I recorded exactly what I had done and which connection corresponded to which line on my sketch. And when I had everything all wired up and I turned it on, it didn't work again. But now I knew what I was trying to do. I had a diagram I could follow, and I could start understanding the problem and fixing them. A few minutes later, it worked, and I could multiply 2 times 2. The answer is 4, incidentally.
Here's my starting over story. Since today is my anniversary of my divorce, I thought it only made sense to talk about this as my fresh start. I got married when I was 22. I didn't have much self-confidence, and I was thrilled that someone actually wanted to marry me, without asking myself if he was even the right person for me. After having 3 sons, it was more than apparent that my marriage just wasn't going to last. I was divorced at the age of 37. Ending my marriage was a very big deal. It was as painful to me as washing away an entire society. I was figuratively drowning. But after my personal storm ended, I started all over again. I was more experienced, I was smarter, and I knew what was best for me this time around. When I started dating again, I knew that things were going to be different. This time, I knew that I mattered too. I wanted someone who treated me with love and respect, a new and beautiful concept for me. Starting over was painful, but absolutely necessary for my survival. And in the end, I'm blessed with a more loving, peaceful, and a much happier life.
So just like Robbin and I, God decides to start over.
And after the flood, God says in chapter 8, "Never again will I doom the earth because of man, since the devising of man's minds are evil from his youth. Nor will I ever again destroy every living human being as I've done in the past."
And then again in chapter 9, God makes his covenant with Noah and his offspring and the animals and says, "Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth."
And so God makes this promise more than once. Does God feel that flooding the earth was a mistake?
Maybe this is the first example of Jewish guilt.
And God knows, as I'm sure all of us know, if you don't change anything, you're probably going to get the same result that you got before.
As Benjamin Franklin supposedly said, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results.
So what does God change?
What does God do differently the second time to make sure that the situation doesn't deteriorate again?
What does God do differently so that mankind doesn't become evil and selfish and out of control?
As Robbin and I interpreted what we read, God appears to make 2 changes.
The text says, after Noah and his family are back on dry land, God says, "The fear and the dread of you shall be upon all the beasts of the earth and upon all the birds of the sky, everything with which the earth is astir, and upon all the fish of the sea. They are given into your hand. Everything that lives and moves about will be food for you."
And later God says, "Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For in God's image did God make man."
So God has done two things to change the situation.
First, God declares that man is superior to the plants and the animals and will rule over them.
And secondly, God sets out a rule, a law.
God declares that anyone or anything such as an animal that draws blood from a human shall have blood drawn from them.
God adds that this is because humans were created in God's image. Humans, not other animals, are superior and created in God's image.
So the question has to be, why does God believe that these changes will stop man from becoming inherently evil as happened the first time?
Why would making humans feel superior to the rest of the animal kingdom prevent humans from becoming evil and selfish again?
Why does requiring punishment for one human who hurts another necessarily stop the previous decay into chaos?
In stating the need for punishing anyone or any animal that hurts another human, God has given us the rule of law.
Or at least the first law.
God knows that laws and the obedience of these laws prevents widespread corruption and evil.
By requiring punishments for humans who hurt other humans, we as a society can stop evil from getting a foothold.
We can respect the law.
We can respect righteousness.
And we can force ourselves to suppress our evil tendencies because we understand the consequences.
And why must humans feel superior to the animal world?
Because we do know better.
Because we know right from wrong.
We're not animals.
We understand morality.
And by separating us from the animals, by declaring our uniqueness within the animal kingdom, we can't ignore our conscience and act like animals.
We are different. We are aware that we are different, and that difference forces us to acknowledge that we understand when we have done something wrong.
We can't just act like an animal that's unaware.
One of our favorite parts of the story of Noah is when, at the end of the journey, when Noah and his family are back on dry land and God has realized the need to make the changes we've discussed, God pledges that this wiping out of all living things won't ever happen again.
So starting over is actually the easy way out.
This time, God is committed to establishing a universe with mankind that will work.
By ruling out the possibility of another do-over, God is suggesting that moving forward, mankind and womankind will have to work through these issues and make society work.
It is now our responsibility to figure out how to deal with the evil in the world, with hatred, with selfishness, with our tendencies towards cruelty.
We're not animals that can just do what we want, ignoring the consequences or impacts on others.
And we need laws to govern our behavior, and we need to take responsibility for the world and everything that lives here.
God isn't going to solve the problems next time by wiping out all of this badness.
We humans have that responsibility now.
And to show this promise to the world, God shows a rainbow to Noah.
And God declares that the rainbow will always be a sign of his promise to mankind,
To let us work through our issues.
to find our own ways to deal with evil tendencies.
To make our own laws and run our own society. A rainbow.
And despite all the technology in our world today,
Despite the advanced computer graphics in our movies.
despite the powerful computers in our pockets that we call phones,
Despite the medical advances which have let us live nearly twice as long as we typically lived only a few years ago.
despite all this, we will stop and stare whenever we see a rainbow.
It's magical. That arch of color across the sky after a rain.
When we see a rainbow, we stop and stare and marvel at its majesty.
Oh, sure. We could look it up on Wikipedia and see how it has something to do with the way the light refracts off the raindrops that are still in the air.
But that doesn't remove the magic.
That doesn't remove the mystery.
It's still a beautiful array of colors, only visible for a short while.
And it still takes our breath away.
And as Robbin and I talked about the rainbow, we both realized how, in different ways, it's a lot like our belief in Judaism. There's something magic there.
Something beyond the rules. Something beyond the physics. Something we don't necessarily want to understand better.
But there's a beauty to be found in believing that there's something bigger and better than just being animals in this world.
To me, rainbows are just like God, hard to explain, and magical. And even though I can't explain exactly how rainbows or God exists, I still feel moved and connected to its beauty
And when we see that beauty, it takes our breath away.
every time.